It was a quiet Thursday evening when everything changed. I had just returned home from a long day at work, exhausted and looking forward to a quiet night with my wife, Mia. We'd been married for 5 years, but lately, something felt different, off even. There was an invisible wall between us, an unspoken distance that I couldn't ignore. I tried to brush it off, blaming the stress of life, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. That evening, the truth came crashing down on me in the most unexpected way. As I walked into our living room, I noticed something on the coffee table. A phone, not hers. Curiosity led me to unlock it. And there it was, messages between Mia and someone I never thought I'd find myself competing with. My heart sank. The man she was seeing wasn't just anyone. He was someone I knew all too well. My world started to unravel. When I first met Mia, everything about her felt like fate. We were both in our late 20s, fresh out of college, with dreams of conquering the world. I remember the first time I saw her. Her smile was radiant, like the sun breaking through a cloudy sky. It wasn't just her looks that drew me in, though. Mia had a way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room, like you mattered. She was compassionate, understanding, and always full of life. We clicked instantly, and before I knew it, I was falling for her in a way I hadn't fallen for anyone else. Our relationship wasn't without its challenges, of course. Like any couple, we faced moments of tension, arguments, and misunderstandings, but we always managed to work through them. I believed in us, believed in her. The thought of anything breaking us apart never crossed my mind. We had built something real, something strong. We talked about our future, the home we'd one day have, the kids we'd raise. I thought it was going to be the kind of love story that lasted forever. In the beginning, there was always time for each other. We spent weekends together, traveling, laughing, and sharing our hopes and dreams. But as the years passed, things started to change. Slowly, almost imperceptibly. It started with the late nights. Mia, who had always been so devoted to our relationship, began working longer hours at her job. At first, I assumed it was just stress from work, that she needed more time to focus on her career. I supported her, believing in her ambition. But the late nights became more frequent. She would come home exhausted, too tired to talk, too drained to share the moments that used to be so sacred to us. It wasn't just her hours at work that began to distance her from me. The intimacy between us faded. There were no more spontaneous kisses, no more long, heartfelt conversations about our future. We were still married, still living under the same roof, but something inside me told me that we weren't living the life we once dreamed of. I tried to fill the gap, tried to rekindle the spark. I brought flowers home, planned dates, did everything I could think of, but nothing seemed to reach her. It wasn't just Mia's absence at home that had me worried. There were little things that made me question her commitment to our marriage. Her phone would always be face down on the table when we were together, a habit I'd never noticed before. There were whispers about her spending time with someone from her workplace, a colleague I hadn't met. I brushed it off, telling myself that I was just being paranoid. After all, Mia loved me, didn't she? Then came the changes in her behavior. Small things like being secretive about where she was or who she was with. It wasn't anything overt, just a shift in energy, an air of distance that hung over us. I started to feel more like a roommate than a husband. But even then, I refused to admit that something was wrong. I trusted her, how could I not? Mia had always been my rock, the one I could rely on. And yet, deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping away from me, something I couldn't control. As the weeks went on, I started to notice Mia's phone more often. She would step out of the room to answer calls, or she'd take her phone into the bathroom with her, leaving me to wonder what was going on behind closed doors. I tried to ignore it, to dismiss the nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach. I didn't want to believe that the woman I loved could betray me, but the cracks in our relationship were too large to ignore anymore. Looking back now, I can see how things were slipping through the cracks long before I ever realized, but I refused to see it. And then one night everything came crashing down. The discovery that would change everything, my world, my marriage, and the very foundation of everything I thought I knew, was just around the corner. The evening started out like any other. Mia was still at work, and I had come home early, hoping to surprise her with dinner. As I walked into the house, the familiar scent of her perfume lingered in the air. It should have felt comforting, but it only heightened the sense of something being wrong. I put my keys down, glancing at the kitchen, the dining table. Everything was quiet. A few things were off, though. The moment I stepped into the living room, I noticed something I hadn't before: her purse, abandoned on the couch. It wasn't like Mia to leave things out of place, especially something so personal. I sat down thinking I'd wait for her, but my curiosity got the best of me. I reached into her bag to grab my phone, but instead my fingers brushed against something else: a small black notebook tucked under a pile of papers. I hesitated for a moment. I had never been one to snoop, but something in my gut told me I should check it. Slowly, I opened the notebook. At first glance, it looked like a journal, with the pages filled with random scribbles and personal thoughts. But as I flipped through, one entry caught my eye. "I can't wait to see you tonight. The way he doesn't notice, it's almost too easy. But when I'm with you, I feel truly alive." My heart skipped a beat. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Mia's, and she was talking about someone else, someone she had been seeing behind my back. A surge of nausea hit me as I closed the notebook and set it down. I didn't want to believe it. This had to be some misunderstanding, but there was a sinking feeling in my chest that told me otherwise. I couldn't ignore it. I needed more answers. With shaky hands, I grabbed her phone, which was lying on the coffee table, face down. I had never felt the need to go through her things before, but tonight the temptation was overwhelming. I unlocked it, my fingers trembling as I scrolled through her messages. My heart raced as I saw message after message, each one a thread in a web I wasn't sure I wanted to untangle. It was from him, the man she was seeing, the man I had no idea existed in her life, in our life. His name was Jason, a name I recognized but didn't know well. He was a colleague of Mia's from her new job, someone I had heard her mention a few times but never paid much attention to. Now, his name was all I could see, buried in a sea of messages filled with intimate exchanges, promises, and declarations of love. "I can't wait to feel you again, Mia. I love the way you make me feel when we're together. It's killing me that you have to go back to him, but I'm willing to wait." My mind was reeling. Mia, my wife, was having an affair with this man. The evidence was right in front of me. My throat tightened, and the room suddenly felt like it was closing in. How had I missed this? How had I been so blind to the signs? I read more, each message twisting the knife deeper into my chest. They talked about meeting up, about secret rendezvous, about the stolen moments that had been kept hidden from me. I felt betrayed, furious, and completely lost. I had trusted Mia with everything I had, my love, my future, my dreams, and yet she had built a life behind my back with someone else. The images of them together began to fill my mind, and I couldn't stop the wave of anger that rushed over me. How long had this been going on? How many nights had she slipped away from me, leaving me in the dark while she shared her life with him? The worst part was realizing that this wasn't just some fleeting affair, it was real. The feelings they shared weren't just about lust, they were deeper. The words they exchanged carried an emotional weight that felt almost unbearable to witness. It wasn't just about sex. It was about a connection, a bond that Mia had shared with someone else, someone who wasn't me. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at her phone, unable to fully process what I had just discovered. I could hear the sound of my heartbeat in my ears, drowning out the rest of the world. All I could think about was the betrayal, the lies, and the realization that the woman I loved had chosen someone else over me. When Mia finally arrived home, the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. She walked through the door, smiling at me as though nothing had changed, but I could see the guilt in her eyes. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. I simply held up her phone, the messages glaring back at us, a painful reminder of everything that had been hidden. She froze, her face going pale as she saw the phone in my hand. The smile disappeared from her lips, replaced by a mixture of fear and shame. She started, but no words could come out. The truth had already been laid bare. There was nowhere to hide now. The confrontation with Mia that night was nothing short of chaotic. I couldn't find the words, and neither could she. The silence between us stretched for what felt like an eternity. Mia's face was pale, her eyes avoiding mine, guilt written across every inch of her expression. It was as though the world had come to a standstill. After what felt like forever, she finally muttered a weak apology, but I was too angry, too hurt to listen. I wanted to scream at her, but a part of me needed to know more, to understand the depth of her betrayal. I demanded to know who he was, who Jason was, and in the quiet, broken tone that she had adopted, Mia confessed everything. Her affair with Jason had been going on for months. He wasn't just someone she had casually met. He was someone she had connected with on a level she had never felt with me. The guilt in her voice was overwhelming, but it didn't ease the pain inside me. The realization that she was in love with someone else, someone I didn't know, crushed me. The next few days were a blur of emotions, but there was one moment that stood out. I couldn't let it go. I had to meet this man, the person who had stolen my wife's heart, the person who had broken everything we had built. The thought of it churned my stomach, but I had to face him. I needed answers, not just from Mia, but from him as well. I arranged a meeting. It wasn't something I'd thought through completely. It was more of an impulse driven by the need to understand, to see the man who had caused my world to fall apart. Jason agreed to meet me at a small, dimly lit bar on the edge of town. I couldn't decide if I was going to rip into him or just sit there, silent, taking in every detail of his presence. I arrived early, my hands trembling as I sat at the bar, my eyes scanning the entrance. When Jason walked in, I immediately recognized him. He was tall, with a confident, almost smug look about him. His eyes were dark, but there was something unsettling about the way he carried himself, like he knew exactly what was going to happen, as though he had been waiting for this moment. He spotted me almost instantly, his gaze narrowing for just a second, then softening as he approached. "Are you the husband?" he asked, his voice calm, almost too calm for the situation. I didn't reply at first. Instead, I studied him. Jason was in his early 30s with a casual, almost too polished look. He had that sort of charm that seemed to draw people in without effort, but underneath the surface I could sense something darker, a kind of emptiness in his eyes that didn't match the charisma he projected. "I'm the man whose life you've ruined," I finally said, my voice tight with emotion. The anger, the disbelief, and the hurt were bubbling to the surface. I wanted to lash out, but I knew it wasn't going to do anything. I needed to understand why. He took a seat across from me, leaning back in his chair, and for a moment, he just stared at me, almost studying me. The tension between us was palpable, like a storm waiting to break. "I'm sorry, man," Jason said, but the apology felt hollow. "I didn't mean to hurt you, but Mia, she's different. She's not like other women. I never expected to feel this way, but I did." His words felt like a slap. It wasn't the apology I was hoping for. There was no acknowledgement of the damage he had done. Instead, there was a strange sense of pride in his voice, like he was justified in what he had done. I wanted to scream, but I swallowed my anger and pressed him for more. "What did you see in her that made you think she was worth this, worth tearing our lives apart?" Jason leaned forward, his voice softening as if he was trying to explain himself. "It wasn't about her being someone's wife. It was about the connection we had. Mia, she needed someone, and I saw that. She needed more than what you could give her. She needed to feel something, to be reminded of who she really was." The words stung. It was like he was saying that I wasn't enough for Mia, that I hadn't been able to give her what she needed. But more than that, there was a certain arrogance in the way he spoke. It wasn't just about love. It was about him proving something, about being the man who could offer Mia something I couldn't. I wanted to say so many things to him, to tell him how much he had hurt me, how much he had destroyed my trust and my marriage. But as I listened to him talk, a strange sense of understanding began to seep into me. Jason wasn't just a villain. He was another victim in this mess. A man who had fallen for Mia the same way I had. He had found in her something that spoke to him on a deeper level, just as I had once done. "I'm not proud of what I've done," he admitted quietly, a flicker of regret crossing his face. "But Mia, she's not just a wife to me. She's someone I love, and I never expected to fall for her." His confession hit me hard. For the first time I could hear the raw emotion in his voice, the vulnerability that mirrored my own. It was then that I realized this wasn't just an affair of convenience. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was love, messy and complicated, just as it had been for Mia and me. I sat back, processing everything he had said. The anger was still there deep down, but a part of me felt something else. Was it pity, sympathy, or was it something far more complex, a connection to this man I never thought I'd have? "I didn't come here for sympathy," I said, my voice quieter now. "I came here to understand why." Jason nodded, as though he expected no less from me. We sat there in silence for a while, both of us grappling with the weight of our shared reality. Neither of us had the answers we were looking for, but in that moment, something unexpected shifted between us. It wasn't friendship. It wasn't forgiveness. But there was an unspoken understanding, Two men who had been tangled up in the same web of love, betrayal, and confusion. As I left the bar that night, I felt no relief, no closure. The questions still lingered, but one thing had changed. I no longer saw Jason as a stranger. He was part of this mess, just as much as I was. And though I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal, there was an undeniable bond that had formed between us, one that would change the way I saw everything moving forward. In the days following my meeting with Jason, I couldn't shake the strange bond that had begun to form between us. I didn't want to admit it, but it was undeniable. I had walked into that bar filled with nothing but anger and resentment, determined to tear him apart with words to exact some form of retribution, but somehow the meeting had shifted in a direction I hadn't expected. Instead of seeing him as a mere intruder in my life, someone to hate and punish, I found myself feeling understood. It didn't make sense. How could I, the man who had been betrayed, find common ground with the very person who had taken my place in Mia's heart? But that was exactly what happened. As we sat there, speaking in hushed voices, there was something raw in Jason's words, something that mirrored the confusion I felt about Mia. He wasn't just another man. He was someone who had seen the same woman I loved, seen the same complexities and contradictions in her, and yet his experience with her had been so different from mine. It made me question everything I had thought I knew about love, loyalty, and the nature of the relationships we form. I couldn't help but think about the things Jason had said during our conversation. Mia needed someone who understood her in ways that I apparently couldn't. Was it possible that she had fallen in love with him for reasons I could never have given her? Perhaps our marriage had become too predictable, too comfortable. But Jason had given her something new, something thrilling. I hated him for it. But at the same time, I could see how he had slipped into that space, that emotional void that had slowly grown between Mia and me. Over the next few weeks, I tried to distance myself from the chaos, to focus on the fragments of my life that still made sense. I told myself that I needed to move on, that I would find a way to forgive Mia, to rebuild my life without her. But the pull to understand everything, to understand her, was too strong. And then, as if the universe had conspired to force me to confront this new reality, Jason and I met again. It wasn't planned. I had seen him at a cafe while grabbing a coffee, and to my surprise, he waved me over. There was no tension between us this time, no awkwardness. In fact, it felt like a strange kind of peace had settled over our interactions. Jason wasn't the enemy I had painted him to be. He was just a man who had been swept up in something as messy and uncontrollable as love itself. "I've been thinking about what you said," Jason confessed, his eyes locking with mine, "about why we both ended up here, stuck in this strange place, tied together by the same woman." I nodded, unsure of what to say. Was I still angry? Of course. Was I still hurt? Deeply. But there was a part of me that was genuinely curious about his perspective. I had to know what made Mia choose him over me, why she had chosen this affair in the first place. "I can't explain it either," Jason continued, leaning in slightly. "I never intended for this to happen. At first it was just a fling, something exciting, something new. But Mia, she has this way of making you see the world differently. She feels things deeply, in a way that most people can't understand. And when you connect with someone like that, it's like you can't help but get pulled in, no matter how hard you try." I wanted to ask him more, how he had felt in those moments with her, what made him stay when he knew she was married. But the truth was, I already understood. I had felt it too, at least at the beginning of our relationship. Mia had a way of making you feel alive. She wasn't just beautiful or charming. She had this intensity that was magnetic, this aura that drew people in without them even realizing it. It was that same intensity that had made me fall in love with her in the first place, and it was that same intensity that had made me blind to the cracks forming between us. Jason and I talked for hours that day. At first it was awkward. There was an unspoken tension between us, the knowledge that we were talking about a woman who had changed both of our lives in ways we hadn't anticipated. But as the conversation went on, it felt less like a confrontation and more like two people who had been caught in the same storm. We both knew Mia's flaws, her vulnerabilities. We both knew how she could be distant one moment and deeply affectionate the next. It was as if we were both victims of the same emotional push and pull that had torn us apart. The more I spoke with Jason, the more I began to understand why Mia had been drawn to him. He wasn't just some random affair. He was a person who saw Mia in a way that I had failed to, someone who gave her the space to explore parts of herself that I had never been able to reach. Our conversations became more candid, and with every word, a small part of the anger I'd been holding on to melted away. Jason wasn't a villain in my story. He was simply another man who had fallen under Mia's spell, and he too was grappling with the same confusion and guilt that I was, but the connection didn't stop there. As time passed, I realized that Jason and I were starting to share something else, something unexpected. We had become, in a strange way, emotional allies. We were two men who had both loved the same woman, who had both been blindsided by her, and yet, in some twisted way, we now shared a bond that was stronger than the one Mia had with either of us. It was as if we had become bound by a mutual understanding of love's darker, more complicated side. That connection began to grow. We shared more than just words. We shared the same pain, the same sense of betrayal. And yet, it was starting to feel like something deeper was forming. Maybe it was the way we had both been changed by Mia, or perhaps it was the shared sense of loss that had brought us closer. But whatever it was impossible to ignore. And as much as I hated myself for it, I found myself looking forward to our conversations, our unexpected meetings. The lines between anger, understanding, and even affection were beginning to blur, and I wasn't sure what to make of it. What I did know was this. Jason wasn't just a stranger anymore. He had become part of the complex puzzle of my life in ways I couldn't have imagined. And the truth was, I wasn't sure where this connection was leading, but I couldn't deny that it was changing me in ways I never expected. It was a cold, rainy afternoon when the final confrontation took place. The sky was heavy with clouds, as if nature itself was reflecting the storm brewing in my heart. Mia had asked to meet. It had been days since we'd last spoken, weeks maybe, and the silence between us had become unbearable. The pain of her betrayal was still raw, but something had changed in me over the past few weeks. The anger had shifted into something else. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a kind of quiet acceptance that I couldn't fight anymore. I had to face the truth, no matter how painful it was. We met at the same cafe where we used to go for casual weekend brunches before everything fell apart. She sat there waiting, looking lost and fragile. A woman who seemed to have lost herself in the web of her own choices. Her eyes met mine, but she didn't speak immediately. There was an awkward silence between us. A quietness that echoed the finality of our situation. "I know you've been talking to him," she said, her voice barely a whisper, yet there was an undeniable tremor in it. "I have," I replied, my words coming out colder than I intended. I could see the pain in her eyes, but a part of me couldn't find it in myself to soften. She had crossed a line, one that couldn't be erased, no matter how many apologies she offered. She reached across the table, her hand trembling as she took mine, but I pulled back, not out of anger, but out of necessity. She needed to understand that there were consequences to what she had done. "Mia, I don't know what you want from me anymore," I said, the frustration and confusion bleeding into my voice. "You've already taken everything from me. You've taken my trust, my peace of mind, and now you want me to fix this? You want me to go back to how things were?" She shook her head, her eyes brimming with tears. I don't want to go back to how things were. I want to be honest with you." She paused, taking a shaky breath before continuing. "Jason, he wasn't just someone I cheated with. He's someone I fell for. I never expected it. I never planned for it, but I couldn't stop it." I looked at her, trying to process her words. There it was, the truth that I had been too afraid to hear. She had fallen in love with him. It wasn't just an affair. It was an emotional connection. One that had taken root in her heart in ways I hadn't seen coming. But what hurt even more was the admission that she was willing to face it, to be open about it now, when everything had already unraveled. "I don't want to hurt you," she whispered, her voice breaking, "but I have to be honest. I've been torn between the two of you for so long. I never wanted to hurt you, but I did, and I don't know what to do anymore." The weight of her confession hit me harder than I expected. It was as if the ground beneath me had shifted, and I was left standing there, lost. I had always believed that love was enough to overcome any obstacle, any challenge. But Mia's words made me question everything. Was love ever really enough? Could two people who had loved each other so deeply suddenly fall apart because of a few choices, a few moments of weakness? "You think I don't know what it's like to love someone like that?" I finally said, my voice low and controlled, though my heart was a storm of conflicting emotions. "I know what it's like to fall for someone, to feel something so deep, it consumes you. But what you've done, what we've done, has consequences, Mia. And you don't get to erase that. Not just because you feel bad about it. Not just because you want to come back to me now. She looked at me, her eyes filled with regret, but something else too. Something I wasn't sure I could identify. Maybe it was love. Maybe it was guilt. Or maybe, just maybe, it was relief that the truth had finally been spoken. I'm not asking for forgiveness, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I'm not even asking for you to take me back. But I need you to know that I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted to destroy us. The pain of her words cut deep. It wasn't the apology I had hoped for. It wasn't even the closure I had needed. But in that moment, I realized that Mia was still the woman I had loved. And that made everything worse because how could I continue loving someone who had betrayed me so thoroughly? I know, I said, my voice cracking slightly. But it's not just about you anymore. It's about what I need, what I deserve. And right now I need to let go. I need to find a way to heal. There was a long silence between us, and for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to feel the weight of everything. The pain of betrayal, the heartbreak, the anger. It all hit me like a wave, and I let myself feel it. I needed to mourn what we had lost, to let go of the woman I thought I would spend my life with. But more than that, I needed to release the hold that Jason, the man I had once seen as my enemy, had unwittingly claimed on my heart. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, I said quietly, my voice steady, but filled with sorrow. But I'll try to move on, for myself, for both of us. Mia nodded, her eyes filled with tears as she reached for my hand once more, but I stopped her. This time I didn't pull away in anger. I pulled away to protect myself. We both needed space to breathe, to heal, and maybe someday to forgive. But not today. As I walked away from the cafe, the rain still falling heavily around me, I couldn't help but feel as though the world had shifted. Everything had changed, and I didn't know what was left for me anymore. But one thing was clear. The story I had been living for so long, the story of me, Mia, and our perfect life, was over. And the next chapter was one I had to write alone. It wasn't just about Mia anymore, it was about me. It was about finding myself again, finding peace in the chaos. And no matter how hard it was, I had to take that first step, away from her, away from the life we once shared, and into a future I couldn't yet see. As the days passed, I slowly began to rebuild my life. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't immediate. I had to take things one step at a time, adjusting to a new routine, to an existence that was no longer defined by the love and familiarity of Mia. The anger and heartbreak still lingered, but I began to understand something fundamental. I couldn't keep holding on to the past. Mia, our marriage, our shared dreams, those were all part of a story that no longer fit my reality. I spent time reflecting on everything that had happened. What I had with Mia had been real. It wasn't just a love story. It was a chapter in my life that had taught me lessons about trust, vulnerability, and my own capacity for love. But it was also a story of human imperfection. People make mistakes. They fall short. They hurt the ones they love, sometimes without meaning to. Mia had made mistakes, but so had I. The truth was, I had failed to notice the subtle cracks in our relationship. I had become complacent in the belief that love alone was enough to hold us together, and when it wasn't, I was too blind to see it. One thing I came to realize during this time was how much I had neglected my own needs. In trying to save our marriage, I had lost sight of who I was, of the things I loved outside of her. I had buried parts of myself in the hope that our relationship would fill all the gaps. It didn't. And as painful as it was, I understood now that I had to find my own way, separate from Mia, separate from the woman I had once loved so deeply. I spent more time with friends, reconnected with hobbies I'd long since forgotten, and began to focus on my own personal growth. The first few months were the hardest. There were nights where I would lie awake, the weight of everything pressing down on me, wondering if I had done the right thing by walking away. But with time, the heaviness started to lift. I felt lighter, more myself. I no longer defined myself by the failures of my marriage or the betrayal that had shattered me. I was learning to build something new, something that was mine. And then, one day, I received a message from Jason. It had been weeks since our last conversation. I had expected that to be the end of it. No more ties, no more shared understanding. But his message was simple. I hope you're finding peace. It was strange. I had never thought of Jason as someone I would ever talk to again. But somehow, His message didn't fill me with anger. Instead, it made me realize that maybe we had both moved on from the past. I wasn't the same person I had been when we first met, and neither was he. We were both different now, scarred, but stronger. I didn't reply immediately, but as I sat there staring at the message, I realized something else. Maybe we didn't need to hate each other. The bond we shared, formed under the most painful of circumstances, had taught us something valuable: the complexities of love, of betrayal, and of forgiveness. It wasn't perfect, and it would never be easy, but I had learned that forgiveness wasn't just about letting go of the past. It was about accepting that things were never going to be perfect and finding peace with that. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Jason wasn't the enemy. Mia wasn't the enemy. The enemy had been my own unwillingness to face the truth, to accept that not everything is meant to last forever. Not all relationships are built to withstand every storm, and that was okay. What mattered now was my own healing, my own journey toward finding happiness again. In the end, I chose to forgive, not because I owed Mia or Jason anything, but because I owed it to myself. I owed it to the person I was becoming, to the person I had lost in the chaos of love and betrayal. Forgiveness wasn't about excusing the past. It was about freeing myself from it. It was about choosing to move forward with my life, no longer bound by the mistakes and regrets of what had once been. And so, I did. Slowly, I started to let go of the past. The memories of Mia, of our life together, didn't disappear, but they became less painful. They became a part of me, part of my history, but not my future. I didn't need her or Jason to be whole. I had to be whole on my own. In time, I found peace. It wasn't a dramatic moment nor a sudden revelation. It was a quiet realization, a sense of calm that washed over me as I let go of the need for answers, for closure. I didn't need to understand everything. I just needed to accept it, to make peace with the truth, and to embrace the possibility of what lay ahead. And in the quiet after the storm, I realized that sometimes the unexpected connections, the ones that come out of the most painful moments, are the ones that lead us to the most profound healing. I had learned that love, no matter how twisted or complicated, had the power to change us, to help us grow. But in the end, the most important love was the one I had for myself. If you've ever experienced betrayal or struggled with letting go, I want you to remember one thing. Healing takes time, but it's possible. Take the first step toward finding your peace today. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What's your journey toward forgiveness been like? And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that might help you on your path to emotional freedom. Stay strong and keep moving forward.